People are asking the question, why is the right coming out on top? Ever since the re-election of Donald Trump last year, it has felt as though across Europe and many other places in the world, we're experiencing the unstoppable rise of right-wing populism. Once Trump got into power, we saw the strengthening, the emboldening of mini-Trumps in many different places. Meloni in Italy, Milei in Argentina, and of course, Nigel Farage in Britain. It feels as though the left are fighting a rearguard battle. But actually, if you think about it, ever since 2008, there's been a seismic shift in politics and the whole political plane. The 2008 financial crisis developed a deep anti-establishment mood in society and in the working class, an anti-rich mood, and that's been trying to find an expression for around 15 years. Initially, that expression was actually found on the left, and you saw a surge of left-wing figures and parties having a deep root in the working class. But the left was unable to take advantage of any of those opportunities. And so here we are today. Now, to discuss that process with me is Khaled, the London organiser for the RCP. Welcome, Khaled.
Thank you.
So, yeah, we want to start by saying, although we are living through what feels like this, rise and the strengthening of the right wing, actually not that long ago, it felt as though the opposite was taking place and there was a rise on the left in politics.
Yes, for sure. And it's important to give that context in order to not just freeze at one snapshot and basically become very demoralized as a result. And you're right, after 2008, there was this tremendous surge forward for the left, many different progressive movements. And one that jumps out at me straight away was the Indignados movement in Spain, which began in around 2011. And this was a huge anti-austerity protest movement where the social issues, especially affecting the youth, really came to the fore. And the way in which the Spanish state clamped down on those protests was very, very severe. And very quickly, we saw this spread, basically, to the working class. There was these waves of general strikes that basically cascaded over the country. You saw initially this white tide of people coming out in defense of healthcare and against privatization. You also saw a green tide as well develop, which was in defense of education. And it quickly became this rallying point, expressing in a very strong way this anti-establishment mood that had developed. You had the miners that were out on strike, and there was this march in Madrid in 2014, the Dignity March, where 1 million people came out onto the streets, and they were calling for the economy to be placed in the hands of the people. That's pretty significant, and yet it doesn't feel like the left today look back on these movements and where initially in the face of attacks and crisis, working class people first turned. And this did find a political expression as well, we should say. Like that you saw what seemed like the unstoppable rise of Unidos Podemos.
People turned out in Madrid on Saturday for the latest show of strength for Podemos, the new left-wing party that in just a year has come from nowhere to threaten to change the face of Spanish politics. It was the biggest demonstration yet of the mass support that's propelled it to the top of the opinion polls ahead of this year's local, regional and national elections.
The party around Pablo Iglesias, who initially became famous from having his own podcast and and going on a lot of right-wing television shows in the Spanish state and attacking the political establishment. But he became this real reference point, and this anger found this political expression. But very much with the rise of Podemos around 2015, 2016, you began to see this obsession with parliamentary politics, with parliamentary arithmetic. And there was very little democracy in the rank and file organizations. Many left-wingers were purged. And actually, by the time that Podemos came to power in a coalition government in 2020, they had reneged on a lot of the popular promises that they had made. Specifically to the Spanish state, it was the questions of the right of self-determination to the people in the Basque Country and also in Catalonia. And they tried to take this equidistant position between Spanish nationalism and the aspirations of oppressed people within the Spanish state. But they began to roll back a lot of their anti-austerity rhetoric even before taking power. And that's significant, I think, because it actually shows that no matter how popular you might seem in a particular moment or how unstoppable the rise of a figure can be, if you try to manage the crisis of capitalism, you can very quickly discredit yourself.
Yeah, and this is precisely the point. We are communists, right? And we think it's important to constantly point out you cannot manage the crisis of capitalism. And unfortunately, at this time, despite this surge in support for left-wing parties across Europe and in other places, because these parties ultimately were trying to reform the capitalist system, if and when they got into power, they ended up discrediting themselves because they took all of the inspiration that they had helped, develop in the masses that were following them and then destroyed it. Yes. Because they reneged on their policies, particularly on this question of anti-austerity. And the other clear example of that is Greece, yes, where around the same time, again, 2015, you see the rise of Syriza, which, has this huge movement developed behind it on a very, very clear anti-austerity program. Millions of people supporting Syriza. They get into power on this huge mandate, all about basically refusing to accept all of the debt. Like the Greek economy was a very debt-ridden economy. And the response from the EU, from the giants of European capitalism, were that they would have to accept austerity programs. And that was the only way forward. But that is not what the working class in Greece wanted. That's not what Syriza were initially putting forward. They get into power to kind of reaffirm that mandate. There's even a referendum held in Greece to reject what the EU is putting forward, reject the Troika's diktats, the austerity and all of these cuts have to be implemented in Greece. The working class in Greece are very clear that that's not what they want, that they will not accept it. And then a week later, the party in power, Syriza, basically just accept it.
Yes.
And Varoufakis, who's a famous kind of figure on the left, he's still well known, writes books every now and then. He was a key architect of this, and he is considered or self-described Marxist, even, and describes himself as this and does a lot of talks. And yet there he was in a position of power. He tries to cleverly find a way out of, ignoring what the EU is saying, but ultimately isn't able to lead or fully have that confrontation with the capitalist system. And so he just resigns rather than actually take the fight where it needs to go. At a time when the masses and the working class had given such a clear mandate and probably could have been organized and mobilized to take the situation further.
Yes.
But that is not what happened. And that led to a huge discrediting, of course, of Syriza and demoralization and anger, of which the consequences are definitely still present today.
For sure.
In Greece.
And now Yanis Varoufakis makes his way around Europe telling the left what they should do.
Yes.
Well, he had the opportunity to act as the finance minister. And the question was posed, do we break with capitalism? Yeah. And instead, he fell back on clever arguments in trying to win the economic case. And it was very clear that the European Union, the IMF, the European Central Bank, were not willing to listen to any clever economic argument that he could make. Why? Because if they were to push forward with this popular mandate, what example would that have set for the European working class? Yeah. For other countries that were in debt crises as well, in Spain, for instance, in Italy, in Ireland, and so on. So they didn't want to set that precedent. It is felt in Greece today. In fact, afterwards, you saw an anti-austerity program that was even harsher than what the masses initially rejected being implemented by this popular party that had this mandate. And now Syriza have basically, they're a spent force electorally.
Made themselves irrelevant.
Yes. And not so far from here. We had the election of Francois Hollande that preceded actually this wave we're describing by a little bit of time. But he was a very popular left figure, part of the Socialist Party. And he won the election in 2012, promising what? A super tax on the rich. And I think it was something like 75% of tax on earnings over 1 million euros, which was tremendously popular within France. But when he came to power, there was sabotage from within. I've given this example before, but one French tax lawyer actually wrote a book saying why I am leaving France. And he talked about the harming of the competitiveness of French capitalism, the damaging of France's reputation for international finance capital. And very quickly, the people that Hollande had around him were saying things like, well, don't worry, we'll come to an agreement later. And then they began to water down this program until there was no substance to it left. And so it wasn't effective. And I think this points out two clear things, two lessons we need to learn. And the first is, if you leave the economy in the hands of the bourgeois, they will damage the economy if they feel their interests are threatened,
Absolutely.
right? There's always the threat of capital flight, basically just divesting from an economy. And that's the leverage they use to force governments to do what they want, to carry out their diktats, as you were describing. And it really shows, and this is something I feel like a lot of the left get wrong, that it's not governments that dictate to the bankers and billionaires, it's the other way around.
Yes.
And I think also another key thing we should draw out from this is that Hollande never wanted to break with capitalism. Most of these figures, despite the radical phraseology and the language they would use, they never believed that the working class could truly transform society, take the power out of the hands of the capitalists and so on. And so what do they try to do? They try to incentivize the capitalists to invest in the economy.
Yeah.
But since 2008, in France, in Spain, in Greece, in Britain as well, we have seen so little investment in public infrastructure. We were talking about this last week, right? In fact, we've seen asset stripping of key utilities. We've seen just the siphoning off of wealth to shareholders. And this comes down to a fundamental fact under capitalism. The bourgeois do not have any social responsibility to society.
Yeah.
They are not do-gooders, right?
Yeah.
They will invest where they think they can make a profit. And if that's just speculating on the stock market, if that's parasitic financial activity, they'll do that. So there can't be this social piece of, oh yeah, we want this progressive movement of the working class and we want to satisfy that. And we can just get private capital on board. That there is no such thing.
Yeah. And what we've described, or what you've just described, is the problem of these so-called left parties when they get into power and discredit themselves. That has an imprint, that has an effect on the working class and what they think and what they might try out again in the future. And this wasn't that long ago. This is in the memory of a lot of people. But actually, we should say some left-wing individuals, parties, they don't even get into power, and still the way in which they act in their attempt to is enough also to set things back. Yeah. And I think there's two clear examples of that, which is Bernie Sanders in America and also Jeremy Corbyn in Britain. At the same time as Greece and Spain and France a little bit earlier, you also then saw the rise of Bernie Sanders and Jeremy Corbyn, because this was an international phenomena that was taking place. As we said, there was an anti-establishment mood in society trying to find an expression. What was very exciting at the time was the initial expression of Bernie Sanders, who kind of bursts onto the political scene talking about revolution against the billionaires.
Let me be as clear as I can be. There is something profoundly wrong when the top 0.1% own almost as much wealth as the bottom 90%. There is something profoundly wrong when most of the new income is going to the top 1%.
And, you know, an assault on the political class and the bill, he kind of used that language as well.
Healthcare being a big thing.
And he, begins running as a candidate, and he was getting a huge amount of support, overwhelmingly from young people, and doing rallies to tens of thousands of people. The Democrat establishment obviously loses its mind and stitches it up to try and prevent him from being nominated as the candidate, basically. and which is how Hillary Clinton ends up as the candidate. And Bernie Sanders, rather than seeing all the momentum behind him, all of the support for the ideas he's putting forward, and he's talking about the working class, which again is a very unheard of thing in American politics, talking vaguely again about socialism, but lighting up the inspiration of so many people. But after he's stitched up, he basically says, we've all now got to support Hillary Clinton.
He falls on his sword, right?
He falls on his sword and he says, everyone must support Hillary Clinton to defeat Donald Trump. Well, we'll see where that got everyone a bit later. But this was, an initial rise and then a very quick fall. And that actually did, set things back for a whole layer of people. What we said at the time, and we continue to say, is what Bernie Sanders should have done was break with the Democrats, and that the Democratic Party in America is a capitalist party. It cannot be used by the working class. America has two major capitalist parties in the form of the Republicans and the Democrats. And Bernie Sanders, unfortunately, because again, ultimately, is trying to work within the confines of the capitalist system, that also means working within the confines of their parties. And so wasn't able to take the step that was necessary. Anyway, there's a lot of important analysis that we have on Bernie Sanders and the Sanders movement on our American comrades.
Just one thing on
Go
that.
ahead.
When Trump was asked, who would you rather face down in an election, he said, I will take a Clinton over a Sanders any day of the week.
There you go.
Which signifies something.
It says a lot. And there was super interesting polling at that time of Trump voters who said they would vote for Bernie Sanders before they would vote for Hillary Clinton, if the choice came down to that, which shows, again, what class instincts Bernie Sanders was able to connect with, that Hillary Clinton obviously couldn't, because she was from the establishment and working very consciously and clearly in the establishment's interests. But we can't go into, we don't have enough time to go on about Bernie Sanders, but it's just to say that, again, this was happening at the same time as the rise of Jeremy Corbyn in Britain, which was a political earthquake when Jeremy Corbyn became the leader of the Labour Party. And even to himself, it was a surprise. And the whole of the left, it was this shocking thing that suddenly happened. There was a kind of tradition on the left in Labour where every time there was a leadership contest, it was like, okay, which one of us is throwing our hat in this time round?
It's symbolic.
Because we've got to just do it. But then that year, it was Jeremy's turn. He does it. And then he wins because it happened at the right time, which is when this anti-establishment mood had reached a certain fever pitch. And so the things that he was talking about, inequality, anti-austerity, it connected. And then that was the beginning of a snowballing in the Labour Party on the left. The ruling class panicked. Actually, they make him run for a second time. There's a second leadership election because they're trying to get rid of him, and they put a lot more work and effort into getting rid of him. He's re-elected on an even bigger mandate. And then there's this kind of, this mood of momentum that develops. The Labour Party grows to becoming the biggest political party in Europe.
Yes.
And this was extraordinary on a clear anti-austerity program, talking about socialism in his terms and all of these kind of things. And, people talked about how young people were surging towards him. If you're in Britain, you'll know people still try and redo this Jeremy Corbyn song, but it was a real phenomena. You would see videos of sixth form students just bursting out into song, festivals, Glastonbury.
He basically headlined.
It's really hard to imagine if you didn't live through it, perhaps. But this is the point, right? Because you said in the introduction, which is very important, that we can't just look at snapshots, one election result as the defining explanation or commentary on the mood that exists in the working class. And some people at the moment feel as though the working class has just all become super right-wing and super racist, as though it's this deep embedded issue. And we've now just got to patiently wait for a few more decades where things can change again. But actually, I think the truth is we live in a politically very volatile period. And not so long ago, we were seeing a huge surge in the left wing. Yes. However, in the case of Jeremy Corbyn and Bernie Sanders, these people didn't get into power, and that also has to be understood, because there's lessons in that.
And we should take that question on then.
Yes.
Why did Corbyn not get into power? I mean, we started an episode a couple of weeks ago by saying, if you're 18 today, you were born in 2007.
Yes.
So Corbyn was elected leader of the opposition when you were 8.
Yeah.
So how would you summarize that, of like why Corbyn wasn't able to come to power in 2017, 2019?
Well, it's actually, it's slightly similar to what we were saying about Bernie Sanders, which is that Bernie Sanders didn't want to break with the Democrats, right? He didn't want to break with that capitalist party. Now, when Jeremy Corbyn was elected leader of the Labour Party, within the Labour Party, you had agents of the capitalist class.
Yes.
You had agents of the ruling class. The ruling class have always watched the Labour Party quite closely, because there's a constant fear, because of its connection with the working class, because of its connection with the trade unions, over who exactly has control over it and where it's going. And so when Jeremy Corbyn became leader, it shocked them and it scared them, and they had to consciously go on the offensive against him. But the problem was Jeremy Corbyn and the people around him didn't like stand up to that fight, essentially. And rather than, when the attacks against him began to take place, rather than call them out for what they were, rather than say very clearly, these people are trying to kick us out of the Labour Party, they're trying to stop this movement, they tried to make deals.
Yes.
They tried to concede. They tried to say, okay, well, there is this right wing in the Labour Party. Maybe if we can allow them to have these positions, then we can continue on our side. Yeah. Essentially, they were trying to make space and make room for people that wanted to destroy them. That people that wanted to destroy the Corbyn movement and destroy what was surging within it. And that included a lot of the elected MPs, the parliamentary Labour Party.
The vast majority.
Who were against Corbyn. They were against all of the people who joined the Labour Party to support him because of the politics. I think the clearest example of this is probably Jess Phillips, who famously openly said that she didn't want to stab him in the back, but she would stab him in the front.
And she did, repeatedly.
These people were not hiding what they wanted. They were very, very clear that they wanted Corbyn and the left of the Labour Party destroyed and out. Yep. And Corbyn didn't respond to that. He thought he could just kind of keep his way through. Why? Again, he was worried about causing a massive split in the Labour Party, worried about losing everything. And this is the constant problem of we would say left reformists, basically, is rather than base themselves on the masses, rather than base themselves on the working class and the strength of the working class through their programme and through politics, through socialist politics, they end up clinging on to the coattails of capitalism, basically, and try and strike up deals to get a way forward. And that didn't work. And it was those concessions that Corbyn constantly made, which manifested itself politically, we should say. Yes. It manifested itself quite clearly in the so-called anti-Semitism scandal. When Jeremy Corbyn was elected leader of the Labour Party, they threw loads of things at him. They said he was a Czech spy for a while. They also would constantly reference that he'd once talked about friends in Hamas as a kind of phrase that he'd used when trying to talk about a solution to Palestine.
An agent of Putin, I think, got thrown in the mix.
An agent of Putin. There were loads of funny pictures on Newsnight where they would also try and make him look more like a communist, and they'd put the hat on him
communist
and all this kind of stuff.
Anyway.
But in the early days, it didn't have much of an impact. But the anti-Semitism one, which they consistently threw at him, began to take hold. And they said that, Corbyn had made the Labour Party institutionally anti-Semitic. Yes. And Corbyn, we have to say, rather than, again, expose this for what it was, which was just an attack against the left and also an attack against his position on Palestine, he accepted it and he apologised. And he said, you're right, I'm sorry. And they began to expel people for anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. And at the time, we called this out for what it was. It was the establishment's attempt to destroy the left and to destroy Corbyn. And this did have a bit of an impact because it caused demoralisation and a lot of confusion. And this was because the left also had this adherence to identity politics
Yes.
at the time as well, which was a mistake which we've dealt with in many articles and podcasts in the past. That's one clear political manifestation of it. The other was the concession on the second referendum for Brexit. You know, when the Brexit referendum took place, which I think if you're 18 now, you were 9 when Brexit happened.
So.
I don't know. Which was this huge referendum, which we classified as essentially an anti-establishment vote that took place. Although a lot of the rhetoric around it was reactionary, and there was definitely racism on the side of many of the campaigners, but in content, people saw it as this rejection of the status quo. But unfortunately, again, there was a lot of pressure to back the idea of a second referendum to rejoin the EU, which was the favoured position of a certain wing of the ruling class, which was present in the Labour Party.
Yes.
And they hammered this home against Corbyn till eventually he accepts it and says, okay, well, we will support having a second referendum, which to certain sections of the working class looked like a reneging on something that they had voted for.
Yes.
And him falling into the hands of the establishment and the
Yes.
establishment's position.
Yes.
So there are many other things, but I've spoken for quite a while. But it's important to talk about the political consequences of Corbyn trying to make deals with the right wing of the Labour Party, which is essentially trying to make deals with the interests of the capitalist system and
Yes.
the interests of the ruling class,
Yes.
which is a problem and a mistake that left reformists make over and over again.
For sure. I think that's the best way to frame it, because it didn't have to be the anti-Semitism, witch hunt, or even the second referendum that would inevitably show the flaws in this approach. It could have been anything, really, when you think about it.
Yeah.
But it's, as you say, a political manifestation of this weakness and this concession to capitalism. And I think what Corbyn was faced with is what every left reformist leader of a big party or in government is faced with, which is the question, which interest do you serve?
Yeah.
And you cannot, in the times that we live in, serve two masters, right? There is no room for class peace anymore. And I think Corbyn's project was fraught with these dangers from the very, very beginning. Because, as you said, you had the saboteurs within the party. We should say in the 2017 election, the Labour Party machine was diverting resources away from swing constituencies.
Yes.
And we could have seen a hung parliament if there would have been an effective strategy.
Yeah, they consciously wanted to lose that election.
Yes. I think in many cases they'd have rather have lost their seats
Yes.
than to see Corbyn come to power.
Yeah.
But you also saw it with their economic policy as well. Like John McDonnell would go around the city of London on a charm offensive with the bosses and say, we're not going to threaten so much of your interests. You don't have to worry so much and this sort of thing. However, it was enough for the alarm bells to be ringing in the, for the ruling class, which shows also just how far the capitalists will go, and their media in particular, to denigrate and attack anything that they consider a threat.
Yeah.
But you can't make concessions, and as soon as you do, it's not as if you're ever going to appease the agents of capital.
Yeah.
They will come at you again and again and again. And then, of course, when he lost in 2019, and there was that landslide election victory for Boris Johnson, there was this immediate pressure he came under to step down as the leader of the opposition, right? And you then had the wolf in sheep's clothing. Keir Starmer put himself forward and out there.
Who was a big part of pushing for a second EU referendum, by the way. But then as soon as, Corbyn, they forgot about it.
Yeah,
he never mentions it anymore.
Yes, yeah.
But why were they such proponents of it? It's because they knew it was something to beat him with.
It's electoral suicide, really.
Yes.
But I think what's very important is in 2019, the loss of that election for Corbyn didn't mean the loss of popularity in the ideas he represented.
No.
The things he was saying about nationalisation, he even spoke at points about workers' control, though in a very kind of limited and weak way.
Yeah.
the things he would talk about, healthcare as well, getting rid of PFI and privatization, free internet as well, of course, being something that was put forward. These questions are things that people engage with. Like they were inspired, and people are very inspired. And despite all of the attacks in the media, these kind of popular policies do have enduring popularity, I would say. Like, but what did we see? We saw basically this hostile take of the Labour Party. Keir Starmer has had a complete scorched earth approach with the left.
Yeah,
he's removed basically everyone left wing and critical of him in order to show big business that he was ready to be the stable pair of hands, right? And the stable representative. And so on that, because of that block, what did we end up seeing? We saw the strike wave. There was a move towards the industrial front. We described this in past episodes in 2022, starting with the RMT workers. Following on from that, we obviously saw the strike wave in 2023 and so on. So it shows that this anti-establishment mood was searching for this expression during this time, in part on the political front. But when there was a block, we began to see actually workers fighting back against the cost of living crisis.
Yeah. And I think that, when Corbyn lost in 2019, there was this kind of demoralization that set in on the left, of course, and confusion. And then you have the pandemic. But then there's this strike wave, right? Because the mood didn't change. The anti-establishment mood remained. And as you say, people's thoughts and aspirations aren't solely defined by a left-wing figure or any kind of political figure being in a position, right? It's the mood of the working class is defined by the massive events around them and their actual position in society. And what we're trying to trace is this anti-establishment mood in Britain has been looking for an expression for a long time. And we've seen different highlights of it. We saw that. We should also say in the Scottish referendum that took place, and that was before Brexit in 2014. And then you have the election of Corbyn as the leader of the Labour Party was another expression of this. The Brexit referendum, the Brexit vote was another expression of this. The 2017 election, where Labour had this surge under Corbyn's leadership with a left-wing programme, was another expression of this. But then you see another way, which was the 2019, like Boris Johnson, we have to say, was also able to tap into the anti-establishment mood in society. And because of Corbyn's position on Brexit and various other things, Boris Johnson was able to promote himself as a more anti-establishment candidate. And now what we are living through with the rise of reform and Nigel Farage is another expression of a party or a figure tapping into the anti-establishment mood in Britain. That is what is taking place. And all of this is happening actually in a relatively short period of time, right? Politics today, because of the crisis of capitalism, is moving very, very quickly. And this mood is like lurching around and trying to attach onto different things. Look, Nigel Farage has been around in British politics for actually a long time. And he's actually run to be an MP, I think 6 or 7 times before. But he hasn't been able to win until now, until today, and until last year. Why is it? It's because the crisis of capitalism is very deep, and the working class or sections of the working class have tried out different things that so far haven't worked, and now they're trying something else out. And that is how we should explain the Reform's popularity in the polls. Reform, clearly, and Nigel Farage have tapped into a certain section of the working class. It's not one homogenous block. We meet a lot of people who are very anti-reform, obviously, particularly a lot of young people. Nothing is homogenous in that sense. But there is a partial expression of this anti-establishment mood. And you can see this also in polling about what layers of society support reform. I saw a poll, I can't remember where it was from. I think it was More in Common, and in there, More in Common do polls like every single month, and it was looking at where people rank themselves financially and who they want to vote for. And Reform's support had the biggest block in people who classify themselves as people who struggle to make ends meet. 35% of them supported reform. And by comparison, people who consider themselves very comfortable financially had the highest support for Labour and the Conservatives. And this is a huge transformation, actually, in the plane of British politics, right? In terms of where people put their support compared to where they rank themselves financially. And this is something that the left needs to pay attention to, rather than just kind of shouting at reform and shouting at Nigel Farage and declaring him as a fascist.
And all of his supporters as fascists too.
And all of his supporters.
Or far right.
Which they're not, we should say. I think the left needs to understand why reform has been able to tap into this space.
Yes.
And actually, again, it's to do with this anti-establishment mood in society.
For sure. And as we've pointed out in past episodes, Nigel Farage is a demagogue and he has no solutions to the crisis of capitalism. No. He will sit on all the same problems that the people that came before him did. And it will be shown to be just that, demagogy.
Yeah.
But I think to really appreciate the significance of the moment we're living through, we have to put it in the context of British capitalism for hundreds of years was this stable two-party system.
Yeah.
We had the mother of all parliaments, and the Labour Party would more or less represent the interests of big business when the Tories had discredited themselves enough, and given the cricket analogy many times, they'd be the second 11, and it would kind of yo-yo between the two. But earlier this year, there's too many analogies.
I don't really know much about cricket.
But especially this year, and I remember us discussing this around our National Congress, when the election results came out for the council elections, we said the two-party system is finished.
Yeah.
The Labour-Tory duopoly is done.
Yeah.
And that was specifically in reference to this rise of reform, where we saw them perform very, very strongly at council elections. Many Labour councils that had been Labour through and through for hundreds of years, turning reform. And actually reform are beginning to discredit themselves. Now they've begun to run these councils, right? Yes. We should point that out.
Yeah.
But we were focusing more on the side of the Tories in complete collapse, hemorrhaging support to reform. But actually, we are beginning to see a similar thing happen to the Labour Party, which is hemorrhaging support for new formations. Your party, which still hasn't founded yet as a political party, but also we're seeing a surge in the Greens at the moment. And I think we should put this into the context of, we said on this podcast before that sometimes people look at the rise of the right and they become extremely frightened by that. They think that everyone is becoming more right-wing and so on and so forth. But what we should actually say is, despite the failure of the left reformists to seize the most favourable opportunities, in some cases, quite literally snatching defeat out of the jaws of victory. I mean, Jeremy Corbyn was the leader of the biggest left-wing party, I think, in the world even in 2016, 2017. Despite that, we are now seeing a resurgence in popularity of figures quite similar, anti-war, anti-austerity, talking about class issues, the housing question, affordability. See it with Zohran Mamdani to a certain extent in the States.
Yeah.
It looks very likely that he will win the mayorship of New York.
Which is huge.
Which is huge. And also with Catherine Connolly, who's been in the news this week, who's now the Irish president.
Yes.
But we have seen this... that actually it's not as if working class people have just become entirely reactionary. In fact, they've been blocked on the electoral front for some years because the left failed in those positions. Yeah. And yet, when you think back, 4 months ago, when your party was announced, one social media post was enough to get a mailing list of almost 1 million people.
Yeah.
That is incredible. Yeah. It's historic.
Yeah.
And yet, for the last 4 months, there has been precious little that your party has done, specifically Jeremy Corbyn and Zara Sultana. In fact, I have a lot of friends that really engaged with politics again. And as soon as it came out that Zara was suing Jeremy and Jeremy was suing Zara, they were sending me messages saying like, what the hell is
What the hell?
what is the left playing at? It's
Yeah.
criminally irresponsible at a time to raise all of these hopes on things that are popular that we've described: nationalization, anti-austerity measures, pro-Palestine as well.
Yeah.
We haven't seen that represented at the electoral on the electoral plane for a very long time. And obviously, Jeremy Corbyn came out and said, we haven't covered ourselves in glory.
Yes.
You most certainly haven't. In fact, what we can say when it comes to the breakup of this two-party system, it was almost delayed by the fact that Jeremy Corbyn kept the Labour Party relevant in the 2010s.
Yeah.
But now we're seeing the surge of these new political formations. People are looking to try out new things.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's bad news for the ruling class.
It is bad news for the ruling class. I mean, look, what you describe is also, we should say, a bit the kind of kerfuffle, if we can call it that. That's not really an appropriate word, actually. It doesn't give it the magnitude of it. But what happened at the top of your party is also a small example, we should say, of why people hate the left, which is that people hate the left because they view the left as being more interested in virtue signaling, in changing language, obsessing over rhetoric and thinking about stunts than actually solving the problems that working class people face.
Yes.
And that was the response that I felt and a lot of people felt when we saw that fight between Jeremy and Zara, which is ordinary working class people who can't pay their bills, who are worried about the cost of living crisis, will be totally turned off by this spat. Over what, right? If it is a spat, if it's an argument over politics, bring it out into the forefront. But legalistic arguments, it reminds me of the kind of parliamentary maneuverism or parliamentary kind of calculations that left reformists often find themselves caught up in once they even get into power. It doesn't inspire in any way, shape or form. And as you say, it feels a bit criminal given that after, this vacuum that has existed in British politics for a long time, 5 years since, the 2019 election was lost, finally, Jeremy Corbyn and Zara Sultana lift their finger to announce the formation of a party, and it inspires nearly 1 million people to sign up to join it. It's extraordinary, and it shows what people have been yearning for a long time. But ever since then, because what followed was not a fighting program that was announced, because what followed was not rallies that, again, were concentrated on how do we develop we would argue an actually revolutionary program because that is the only program that can ultimately solve the problems in people's lives today. Instead, the whole party has been marred in this organizational kind of argument, and as a result, we should say a lot of people have turned to the Greens. Because what do people want? They want policies that they support, but they also want something to join. And in the absence of your party taking these concrete steps forward with a fighting program, which is what we have argued from the very beginning, the Greens have, and Zack Polanski, as who became the leader of the Green Party, I want to say a few months ago
a couple of months.
On a kind of consciously taking the Greens away. The Greens were always considered this kind of like middle class, liberal kind of green
tree hugging
outfit. Yeah, tree hugging. Not as a serious force in British politics, we should say.
A protest vote.
A protest vote, yeah, perhaps. But Zack Polanski, has come out with a very anti-austerity, pro-Palestine, anti-billionaire image.
Do we shout that we're a socialist party regularly? No, because I think most people don't know what that means. And you switch people off. So instead, I talk about lowering bills, about the public ownership of public services and taxes on multimillionaires and billionaires. These are all socialist policies and they're all embedded and deep within the Green Party.
And as a result, the Greens now have a membership of, I think, 150,000.
Yeah.
And since Zack Polanski became leader, they've doubled in membership. And we find in our experience as the RCP, when we meet young people on campus, we get a lot more questions about the Greens than we do your party at the moment.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. And also one thing I would say is he has a very good media strategy team behind him. He answers questions head on, which is actually a breath of fresh air when you think about the usual politician's response to things.
Yeah.
and he's looking for a scrap in the media.
Yeah.
And I think that is an important thing. It does show, actually, that left figures that are rising at the moment realized the limits of the left before.
A nicer kind of politics.
Nicer kind of politics. It was
Which,
just a little
for people
bit.
who don't know, was what Jeremy Corbyn used as a key kind of phrase or slogan when he was the leader of the Labour Party.
Yes.
He said he was fighting for a nicer kind of politics, which is very jarring when capitalism is destroying the lives, is going to war with the working class. And sorry, I don't want to preempt what you're going to say.
No, I was just going to say that type of rhetoric was
Yeah.
a little bit wet.
Yes.
And I think that Zara Sultana and Zack Polanski have learnt from that.
Definitely.
Their media appearances are quite impressive. However, it does feel to me like there is style over substance with what's coming out at the moment. And if working class people do not feel like there is a policy to back up what you're saying, it can feel a little bit shallow and superficial.
If they don't believe it.
Yes, yeah. And if you're not willing to actually lay out exactly how is the big question, right?
How are you going to pay for it?
How you're going to pay for it is one. I mean, something that came out of I think it was the Green Party conference, was this headline that grabbed my attention, at least, about abolishing landlords.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And we are fully for that as
Let's
communists.
abolish them.
But, if you go beyond the headlines, is that really what Zack Polanski is proposing?
Yeah, no, you're right. This headline caught the attention of the right-wing media in particular, who lost their minds and have been attacking Zack Polanski and the Green Party. They're doing the same thing they did to Jeremy Corbyn when he began, which is, throwing all personal insults and some political insults, going into his history, which is a bit interesting. But nevertheless, we should judge him on his politics today, and not anything from the past. But yeah, abolish landlords. And a lot of people on social media and a lot of young people are like, yes, this is amazing. But it's important for us to go beyond the headlines, look at what did this abolish landlords motion that was passed at their conference actually mean. And actually, Carla Denyer, who is one of the MPs of the Green Party, she actually said, she admitted quite openly that the headline is this kind of fighting thing, but the we're not actually going to abolish landlords. Like, she did say that. And actually, if you look into the detail of what they're proposing, it's essentially rent controls. They're talking about things like, councils should be given the power to take or buy the properties of private landlords if they're not meeting certain requirements to do with insulation, for example, or if their properties have been empty for more than 6 months. They want to abolish the buy-to-let scheme, which is what a lot of landlords use, a lot of people do to kind of buy up properties just to rent them out. And it's talking about just raising taxes on landlords. Now, these are all good things, and we would support them, right? We would support any reform, any measure that actually would directly improve the lives of working class people, 100%. However, we must also point out that isn't abolishing landlords.
Yes.
When we talk about abolishing landlords, we mean it. Because even those measures that I've just described are really just a drop in the ocean in comparison to the depth of the housing crisis that exists in Britain. In Britain, we need to begin building now millions of houses, millions of homes for people. There is a housing shortage. And actually, the way that the capitalist system operates means that landlords can just, if they feel like things aren't going their way, then they'll just take their properties off the market, for example.
Sell them.
Or just sell them, right? Because at the end of the day, the state of housing and the position of landlords within the system is connected to the system itself.
Yes.
And so abolish landlords, absolutely, but we mean it.
Yeah.
And that's different from what Zack Polanski and the Greens are putting forward.
For sure. And I saw an infographic which said that Zack Polanski wanted to abolish NATO or withdraw Britain from NATO. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking to myself, well, that sounds quite impressive. And the first article I remember clicking on was actually it was littered with all of these different caveats, technicalities, and so on and so forth. And I looked into it a little bit more because the Greens have historically been opposed to NATO, but they changed their position, I think a party conference or something like this, when Russia invaded Ukraine. And now what Zack Polanski is actually saying is that NATO has become less useful since Trump is basically leaving behind Europe. And so it would be unrealistic to leave at this particular moment. He says that. And then he also goes on to say something like, we would want to seek a different European set of alliances after Trump. So that is not anti-militarism whatsoever. Someone who has actually been markedly better on this is Zara Sultana. And there was an interview that I watched before doing this podcast where some quite impressive things were brought out. I remember reading an interview she did with, I think, the New Socialist, I don't know, a paper, where she was asked directly, what's the difference between Corbynism Mark I and your party in 2025? She said, well, this is a historic moment for the left where we have to seize opportunities that are coming up and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
She said we need to be more radical, more militant. We need to learn that our class enemies will never be satisfied with concessions. She spoke in that kind of language.
Yeah.
She would speak very radically about how the witch hunt was used in the Labour Party to drive Corbyn out and so on and so forth. And in fact, the thing that really caught my attention recently was her coming out and saying Zelensky is no friend of the working class.
Putin is a dictator, a gangster, and there are war crimes that have been committed. But Zelensky isn't a friend of the working class either. NATO inherently is an imperialist war machine. The only people that benefit from conflict in Ukraine and in Gaza or anywhere else are arms manufacturers and people who profit from the arms industry.
That's significant because for the last, how long has the war been going on for now? 3 years?
3 years, yeah.
Over 3 years, since 2022,
Yes.
February 2022. The left have miserably failed to point out exactly the nature of the Russia-Ukraine war. But you go beyond that statement, and what do you find? She is basically, she doesn't really say why the war occurred, apart from it was a criminal invasion from Ukraine, from Russia and so on and so forth. But we would say this is an inter-imperialist conflict that was provoked by US imperialism, by NATO, the NATO imperialist machine she talks about.
Yeah,
that
she says we should leave.
Yeah.
Which is true.
That has encroached upon Russian spheres of influence for the last 30 years, have bullied Russia for many, many years. And the United States wanted to basically turn Ukraine into like a client state, basically. It started over the question of security guarantees, where Russia, from its capitalist point of view, said, we don't want intercontinental ballistic missiles being put on our border.
Yes.
And the United States barked back, how dare you tell us that we can't turn Ukraine into a NATO base?
Yes.
That's what Zelensky basically was fighting for, right?
Yeah.
Which is the tragic irony of him as a figure. We don't have time to go into all of this now.
No,
But
we don't. Yeah.
I will just say that her explanation as to why imperialist wars happen is because of arms profiteering, which is a very trendy idea on the left, this idea of the military-industrial complex. But it's far, far more complicated than that. Of course, profiteering is an aspect of war, but the reason why Britain has gone in so hard to support the US's proxy war is precisely because of the role that Britain plays for the United States.
Yes.
The United States, the global hegemonic imperialist power. And this was a question of prestige. It was a question of strategic interests.
Yes.
It can't just be reduced down to things like that. So you have to go a little bit beyond sound bites.
Yeah, you have to go beyond sound. And that's the point. It's not enough just to say radical sounding things. It's not enough just to point to the profits of arms manufacturers as the drive for the war in Ukraine or wars anywhere around the world, right? A large part of what we try to explain as communists today is what is happening on the world stage in world relations. Why is war a direct product of capitalism, for example, and imperialism? And this is important. And I think this gets to the essence of how we should respond to a lot of the things that Zara Sultana is saying at the moment, which we should say do sound very radical. She is obviously, presenting herself as a more radical option, I think, for people and young people that are looking at your party. And I watched, the podcast with her on Politics Joe, at the end of which she talks about, what we are fighting for. She says, okay, maybe we'll get 13 seats, but what we want actually is, fundamental transformation of society. And she talks about workers controlling the means of production. And, I haven't heard an MP in Britain talk about controlling the means of production in quite some time. And I think that does make you kind of lift your ear up. You think, okay, wait, what?
Yeah.
What are you saying there, girl? Like that's it sounds very radical, but then you need to follow that up with what you actually mean. Because we should say, even when Jeremy Corbyn was leading the Labour Party, and you mentioned this, John McDonnell, they would talk about workers' control, but what they meant was putting workers on boards, and that was a key part of their programme actually in 2017,
Yes.
was having a certain percentage of workers being represented on the boards of the companies that they worked for. That is very different from workers' control when communists say it, which means not just having a say or having a vote over certain things, but the working class collectively actually owning the means of production, not just controlling it, but owning it. Because what we're talking about, the capitalist system as a whole exists and is run by the ruling class who own the means of production. That means the banks, that means the largest corporations and monopolies that have a say over how society is run. And what we're saying is that we should live without that, without landlords. And by landlords, we're not just talking about one person who owns 3 or 4 houses. We're talking about the biggest landlords that own all of the land in Britain and have a say over it. I was talking about building millions of homes, for example, to fix the housing crisis. That means we need control over the construction companies so that all the materials and the machinery that is necessary to build all of those homes is under the control of the working class. Now, that is a radical transformation of society. And to get there, we need a revolution. Like, that is not going to happen overnight. That's not going to happen by electing an MP here or there. We want to take the means of production out of the hands of the ruling class and put it into the hands of the working class. That is an important difference. That's what we are explaining through our material and through our literature and through this podcast, which I think is different from what Zara Sultana is putting forward.
For sure. And it does throw up the question about how we approach left reformists and different political formations that are gaining the ear of the working class. And I think the first thing we have to say is we point out that this is an example, a stark example of the fact that not everyone has turned right-wing or racist or reactionary, and that actually a lot of the left at the beginning of the year that was seeped in pessimism, just like they were when Jeremy Corbyn lost the election in 2019, they are only focusing on one aspect. They're not looking beneath the surface.
Because why is she saying all this? Like, it's because she can see that mood in society.
For sure. And her and Polanski are basing themselves more and more on that particular mood. And of course, we support, as communists, all of the progressive content within any left reformist program, right?
Exactly.
And we will defend these people in the attacks they face from the billionaire class and from the media and so on. But we have to be very clear about the times that we live in. We have to get real about the situation that is facing the working class. Reforms can be won for the working class, but it will take militant action. It will take mass mobilizations. It will require not just flashy social media campaigns, but actually depending upon the working class mobilizing on the streets. And we have to say, even the weakest left reformist program is seen as a threat to the bourgeois that will do all in their power to sabotage it, to try to destroy the project by whatever means they can. But these measures of anti-austerity, anti-imperialism cannot be fulfilled within the framework of capitalism. And in fact, if you pursue a policy of collaborating with the capitalists or their agents in the labor movement, you will ultimately end up betraying the aspirations of working people.
And this is why we exist as the RCP. This is why we exist as communists, and we have our own separate idea. It's to put this forward and say the truth, that it's not enough just to talk about one billionaire as a problem. It's not enough just to say neoliberalism is the problem. And we should say in your party's founding statement, it talks about neoliberalism. It's the capitalist system as a whole. And if you avoid that, if you don't name that, then you're actually avoiding the problem, and you're not going to be able to solve solve the problems of the working class, you'll disappoint and betray and actually breed the ground for right-wing populists,
Yes.
which is what we're living through already.
Yes,
in
yes,
Britain.
for sure, for sure. And you can kind of see how we differentiate ourselves through some of our most recent political activity, right?
Yeah.
On June 7th, which was supposed to be a national anti-austerity protest
Yeah.
against Starmer, the first, we hoped, of many.
Mm-hmm.
I think the trade unions brought out something like 2,000 people.
Yeah.
We brought 400 people onto the streets. Instead of just simply saying tax the rich, we were saying expropriate the billionaires.
Yeah.
We had our big banner out, revolution against the billionaires,
Yeah.
and it was beginning to connect with a lot of people that were there. Again, when Tommy Robinson brought his goons down to London on September 13th, rather than simply moral liberal phrase-mongering, refugees welcome and so on and so forth, we were pointing out the fact that the malaise that exists in society is a product of the capitalist system. Who is really responsible for the housing crisis? It's the landlords. Who's responsible for breaking Britain?
Yeah.
It's the capitalists.
Yeah.
Why is industry shutting down? Why is there no jobs? It's because of the bourgeois.
Yeah.
So we are pointing that out. And then most recently at the Palestine demo we were at on October 11th, we were pointing to the extremely inspiring example of the Italian workers.
Yes.
Block everything for Palestine. Let's fight for a workers' boycott and place demands on the trade union leaders that are in a position to mobilize millions of people.
Yeah.
That's how you can terrify the Starmer government, right?
Exactly.
That's how you can begin to ready the working class for, what we ultimately want, which is the seizure of power.
Yeah. And I mean, we've run out of time, but I just want to say we are on a mission to raise communist ideas, to raise our ideas to as many people as possible, because we believe these are the ideas necessary to change the world, but also to solve the problems of the working class. And that is why we have the Revolution Festival, which is coming up in just 3 weeks now in London from the 14th to the 16th of November, which is a series of talks, of well-prepared and studied for and prepared for talks on a whole range of different issues. We've already sold
862 tickets.
862 tickets, which is extraordinary. There's a real possibility of us selling out,
Yes.
or as in like reaching capacity. And so we invite as many people as possible to come along to the Revolution Festival, to educate yourself in communist ideas, so that we can meet more people and actually answer this yearning. I mean, all of that potential of your party, which, for the moment has rescinded, but we don't know what can happen in the future.
Mm-hmm.
We want to meet that potential, but we're too small at this size, at this stage. And the only way we're going to get bigger is by having the right ideas and spreading them in the right way. So yeah, please do come along to the Revolution Festival to train yourself in what we need to do.
Yes, please do.